I'm gonna show you how I went from the old school cinder block and 2x4 stands and upgraded to Fish Cave 2.0 with, in my opinion, the strongest type of stand you can build with a Dado cut. Although the new stands are a little bit more complicated to build than the old ones, AKA we actually needed to use some screws and tools, I don't think they're that difficult, and if a schmuck like me can pull it off, you can too. I learned a lot along the way. I share with you the pros and cons, as well as what I learned and what I would and wouldn't do again. And after you watch this video, you should feel confident and be able to take on a similar stand building project yourself. We're checking lumber to make sure it's straight and only taking the straight piles. It's a keep pile and the reject pile. Take some time to get the right wood, just going one by one, taking our time and doing it right. They're not exactly perfect, but they're really good boards. Probably got 30 boards to find 11 decent ones. Next, we need some more 2x4s, but this time we need 10 foot instead of 12 foot. And of course, we always clean up the area, always leave it just as good or better than you found it. So we put back the ones we didn't want. We got 11 and 11. This time it took a little more. We need to get some 2x6s and then we'll be out of here. It's officially time to get started with the cutting, and I've got my plans. I definitely highly recommend that you measure, think about this. I mean, I've been scheming this thing for months. This is not the first rendition of drawing. It's also not the most beautiful, but none of them were. I'm planning out two different types of racks. So this is the first one we'll be building. I'll be building two of these to replace the main rack system. And I'm going to be building another stand that's going to kind of go in the middle there. And that's the blueprints, if you will, for that. I was expecting the wood to come out to $216. I actually got the wood, I think came out to a little bit cheaper, but then I spent, everything else was more. The stain was more, the screws were more, everything else was more. We're gonna be using 2x6s for the main support beams that are gonna be going vertical. So for 4 of those for each of the stands. These are just 8 foot long because the stand's gonna be less than 8 foot. So we can start with an 8 foot, and we're not gonna use the 2x6s in any other application. So we don't really need scrap. We don't need to use the extra. I've already mapped out on the back of here where I'm gonna need to make my cuts. What I've done here is, it looks crude, but essentially I'm gonna have 16-inch gap on the bottom, then 4 inches for the beam, then 13 inches for tank, 6 inches for clearance, 4 inches for beam, kind of building like a layer cake. And that'll be the whole thing going up to the top. And essentially what you want to do is you want to make sure you account for everything. So that's why I'm accounting not just for some gap on the bottom for storage, the 4-inch beam, because remember, is going to be 2x4 sitting like this. So we got to account for that as we go up. Then the tank itself is about 13 inches tall, and we want about 6 inches clearance to work with above that. So we're gonna have that gap, that 19-inch gap is gonna be essentially that window before we get to the bottom of the next beam, and then the next 13 plus 6 inch, etc., all the way up to the top. So what I've done here is laid out a measuring tape across the whole thing. I'm gonna mark with a pencil all those measurements. So 16 inches, the bottom of it, the top of it for that first gap. That's why I brought this to measure exactly, because it's actually not gonna be 4 inches exactly. It's a little less. Remember, these are they're 2x4s, but they're a little less than 2 and a little less than 4. So I'm going to use one to measure it out exactly, and then we're just going to build it up. As far as a tool list, it's pretty simple. I'm not a very handy guy, so this is not a very complicated project. You're gonna need some kind of circular saw. This is one that's battery operated. We'll see how it works. You're gonna need some wood clamps just to hold the 2x4s in place. Measuring tape, a little ruler with some measures is good. You're gonna need a pencil. And then that's really it for the cutting. You're gonna need a screw and some screwdrivers to screw in the actual boards to assemble it. Other than that, you got your stain, which we got over there. We got some rich mahogany.
My apartment smells of rich mahogany.
Other than that, it's pretty simple and straightforward. That's all you need. I actually think we might have done it right the first time stenciling it in. It's not supposed to match up with those exactly. The top row is actually going to sit a little lower, but as you can see, the bottom row is going to set much higher. Right now the tank's only a few inches off the ground. Now it's gonna sit that far off. That wasn't a coincidence either. I gave it 16 inches because that tub, that yellow and black tub, you can buy at Lowe's or Home Depot, those are like 14 or 15 inches, I think. So they'll slide right underneath there. And then that first tank will sit a little higher right there. We got a gap, the same amount of gap we have now. And then second tank will sit there. And then the third tank, like I said, will sit a little lower, right about, actually about the same level, maybe a, half inch lower. And then we'll have plenty of room up here to install the water drip system on the back of these 2x4s instead of on the back wall. And then the air will stay right there. The 2x6 that we measured, which is the one closest to us, and we'll use that as a template and draw a stencil across all of them and make the cut at once. Hopefully this saws up to the job. If not, we'll do it one at a time, but we'll at least use it to stencil them together so they exactly match. And it's very important to make sure they're even as possible, potentially even sanding them flat as possible, because that's what it's gonna be sitting on. Up there, we're probably gonna make some cuts at the end to trim off the top, so it doesn't matter. That's why we're building it from the bottom up, measured from the bottom up, and level from the bottom up. All right, we have all the boards measured. It turns out the quickest way to do this is gonna be probably to link up all the boards the first time and put them like this way and measure them at once, and then use a 2x4 as the guide. Learning as we go, that's why we do this. And then you guys get to experience the final product instead of having to go through all the trials and tribulations. But time to add some power to this project. Hopefully we'll be able to get through all of these with this one saw at once. Technically only 3 cuts, although technically there's many cuts within these 3, but there's only 3 sections we have to cut. There's 3 levels, but for a dado cut, essentially, we're gonna have to make just like multiple cuts and then kind of use a screwdriver or something to pluck out all the middle. I almost forgot. Always make sure you have your safety goggles. So we stand defeated. This saw is not gonna cut it, but we got reinforcements coming. We're back in business, baby. Back in business. Let's go. And we're talking night and day, night and day. This is going much smoother, much better. The next step is going to be to start chiseling out some of this inside. It seems to be popping up pretty easily in these little chips. But we're gonna get these out, and then we're gonna smooth out the inside, make these little pockets. This is close enough for now. We're gonna move on to the other cuts, and then I'm gonna go get a Dremel tool, and we'll be able to kind of make this pretty and carve it out better. When you're doing a project, you know that you're always going to make more trips to the hardware store than you planned. In this case, we're on trip number 2. We had to buy a Dremel tool. My handheld little rasp thing wasn't going to cut it. Got quite a few valleys and peaks here, so hopefully this should work. Never thought I'd summon my inner Bob Ross while building a fish tank stand, but we just made a happy little mistake.
We don't make mistakes. We have happy accidents.
I ended up cutting this dado joint a little too wide. It's too wiggly. So it's the bottom joint too. It's the very bottom joint. This is the bottom of the stand. And I was like, oh, well, that's great, because dado joint number 2 is like perfect. Dado joint number 3 is actually even better. It's like snug as all get out. This one is snug enough. I mean, it's pretty tight in here. But that ain't gonna cut it. That's too wobbly. So I was like, oh, that sucks. 4 pieces of wood down, 2x6s, what a waste of money. But hey, listen, it's a learning experience. But then I was like, wait a second, this may work. We could be able to have a happy little mistake. So the first row of our dado is gonna be 2x6s instead. And it's gonna work. It'll shrink the window. Essentially, this will be the window we have to work with our tank, because there'll be a 2x4 here and a 2x6 down there. So we have 17.5, almost 18 inches instead of our 19, which is okay. And now we're gonna lower this. Instead of being at 16 inches, it'll be closer to 15, but that's okay also because those stands, those storage bins will still slide underneath here. So happy little mistake, some under inner Bob Ross, we're rolling. Made the extra cuts, and then I'm taking it slow this time and just using my hand tool. I don't think I'll ever really enjoy doing this. I'm gonna enjoy getting it done and having built these stands. I love breeding fish. I love doing that. I enjoy it a lot. I'll be happy that I've done this. I don't regret doing it, but this is not my kind of thing. It's just not my kind of thing. The Dremel tool, that's been perfect for some reasons. This is good for others. And yeah, slow and steady is gonna win this race, and that's okay. We're getting close here, but we're gonna make this perfect because we're gonna do it once and we're gonna do it right. I don't really wanna admit how long it took me to make this fit perfectly, but I was pretty much terrified to use the saw again because I didn't wanna overcut, because overcutting would mean recutting everything again. So we took our time and we made it a pretty tight fit. I mean, this thing is just wedged in there right now. But once we get it drilled in there, I think that's gonna be screwed in there. I think that's gonna be what we want, a nice tight fit. It's been 6 hours and we've made 3 cuts, but we are making progress. Our happy mistake made us get another trip to a big box store. This time we went to Lowe's. We don't discriminate. Picked up some more sanding things for our Dremel tool that we bought. And we needed 2 boards, like 2 out of 20, terrible odds. But let's get these packed up and get back home. Ready to make some more cuts. I was planned on making this 64 inches wide. I recommend you don't just go with like, oh, I'll make my stand 4 feet or 5 feet. You have to really just calculate everything. So as you see, I say 64 inches wide, and that's because there was 50 inches of tank, and that is 4 of these 20 gallons. We're gonna use these 20-gallon longs, and they're gonna be sitting just that way. So that's the face we're gonna see is this short face. They're gonna be sitting long ways back. So we're gonna have them 4 across. So they're about 12.5 inches wide across. So 50 inches of tank. Now 4-inch of support beam. That is on the sides because at the very end of each stand, there's gonna be 2-inch, there's gonna be a 2x4. So it's really like 1.5 inches, 1 3/4 or whatever. But I just went with 4 inches of support beam. So we gotta make sure of that. Starting to come together a little bit. This will be the bottom of the stand. And these are the bigger dado joints, the 2x6s. And then we have the 2x4s, and we need to cut some wood for that next. So that's what we have here. Once again, going with 67 inches lengthwise. So all these cuts will be 67 inches. My original plan called for 64 inches left to right, and that was gonna fit 4 20-gallon long tanks. In the middle of the project, I called an audible and decided to make it 67 inches and fit 5 tanks left to right. I wish I would have stuck with just 4 tanks left to right. I recommend that even with the dado cut, you only go 4 feet left to right before putting another center brace within the stand. These are 12-foot pieces of lumber. 12-foot pieces of lumber. So we'll be able to get 67 and 67 twice on each piece with a little bit of scrap. Time to start assembling the first rack. As you can see, we have our 2 2x6 crosses and then 4 of the 2x4 crosses. So hopefully it all comes together. Let's see. It's actually starting to resemble a stand. And as you can see, I'm test fitting it with some tanks. We are losing light, probably about to wrap it up. This is gonna be a 2 or 3 day project, but this will give you an idea of what it's gonna look like. Got the stands, kind of how they're going to be. And right now I'm measuring. The last thing I'll do today is cutting for these support beams that go across. Not only am I gonna do the 2 on the ends, which will, you know, obviously link these 2 pieces together and make the stand, I'm gonna do some in the middle. 1, 2, 3, 4 in the middle. So a total of 4 in the middle plus these 2 on the end, so 6 cross beams. And I'm doing them right in the middle where the 5 tanks will meet eventually. And we'll have extra support because we'll have a cross beam at each of the joining spots of the tanks. Started this morning at 10 a.m. working on the stands. Got to build 3 of them. It is now close to 8 and haven't even finished 1. But there's a lot of curveballs along the way, but we're gonna finish this up tomorrow. I don't think I'll ever be a stand builder. I think I'll stick to breeding fish, but definitely don't regret this. Looking forward to finishing this. Looking forward to getting it done. Definitely gaining a lot of experience. Cracked one tank already, whoops. But par for the course, it's all good. Things rarely ever plan or ever turn out the way you plan them. So this was to be expected, but really looking forward to getting these done. Pretty cool to be able to build my own stands. Started day 2, actually already made some cuts, but essentially we're gonna assemble the first stand today. We cleaned up some of the 28-inch cross sections we made, and those are gonna link this piece to that section. Essentially this is one stand, one side, the other side, and these are the middle piece that are gonna connect the two, and we need 6 per level, so we need 18 total, and we just gotta cut the last few here, and then we'll be assembling the first stand. Is cut now for the cross section, so now we're going to drill our pilot holes and we're going to assemble just the 6 main outer ones first. 1 2 3 1 2 3 right along the edge. Then we'll line up our tanks and we'll align the middle ones we already kind of traced out, and then we'll put this one side together before we join it to the other side. Definitely needed this. Really cool to see the stand up and vertical and holding tanks, and it looks like we are gonna be good to go. Obviously far from done. Still have a lot more reinforcing to do on this in terms of you know, more screws have to go in there to, you know, I'm gonna screw into here as well, tighten it up, got to sand it, a lot more stuff to be doing on this stand. But we're gonna go get ahead and start on the second one of these. These are the vertical beams, the 2x6s for the 4 verticals. This is gonna be an exact replica of this stand. These are the 2 that are gonna go side to side, replacing our old school cinder block and 2x4. I think popping out the dados is my favorite part. Slow and steady wins the race. Finishing up day 2 and just finished up the dado cuts for the second of the 3rd rack. So we are 2 days into the actual construction, but we're making progress, and we have 1 rack standing, not done, but standing. The goal is tomorrow to hopefully get all 3 racks standing. Maybe a lofty goal, but I should have a few hours to contribute to it tomorrow. Putting everything back in the garage, unpacking and packing, that adds to the time too. But last night I ended a little late and I started to get bit by mosquitoes. So tonight, gonna cut it short just before 8 and then get started back tomorrow morning. Innovate, adapt, conquer. Trapped. Here we are on day 3, and I definitely wasn't as talkative to the camera today. It was all about business, just getting it done. But essentially, I'm just recreating the stand, the first stand that we built, making a duplicate of it. You can use these stands for different size tanks. I do recommend, although in this video I went with a 67-inch kind of left to right span, I recommend you cap it at 4 feet or a few inches more. Obviously you're gonna have like a 4-foot tank, and I'll talk about that why later, but this is very flexible. You can make these dado cuts, you can make them 2 high, you can make them 3 high like I did. If you have much smaller tanks, I'm sure you can go 4 high. You can also obviously customize how deep they are. In this case, I'm using 20 longs. That's why they're, 30 inches plus deep. Whereas if you're only using 10 gallons or something like that, you can make them shorter. You could also use different size tanks on different levels. That's why I recommend that you plan this out and measure before you get started. Double the fun, double the determination. those hours of Tetris as a kid paying off. Here we are on day 4, and I'm constructing the third and final stand. This one's gonna be a little shorter left to right and a little bit deeper front to back. I mentioned earlier about only going 4 foot left to right. If you're gonna go longer than 4 foot left to right, I recommend putting a brace in the middle at least every 4 feet to prevent from future bowing. With this type of stand, we're also utilizing the cross beam, the 2x4, or in this case on the bottom, the 2x6, thanks to our happy mistake. We're using that kind of on its strongest point standing up. Whereas in the old school stands where you have it laying flat, it's not as strong that way. Even then, I still only recommend a 4 foot spances before a support beam in the middle. I think by this point, I've shed plenty of blood, sweat, and yes, even some tears. This project was definitely kind of a humbler. Very proud to have undertook it, don't regret it at all, but it definitely challenged me to the max. I severely underestimated the time it would take me to put these together, probably partly because of my skill set and how it's lacking, but I should have overestimated, that way I wasn't so disappointed. Laboring through the third stand here. He ended up making the gap a little longer on purpose than these 4 foot tanks, because we also want to be able to put a 20 long and a 10 gallon, which is actually like 1.5 inches, 2 inches longer than 4 feet. But that being said, now when we put those tanks on here, they're not long enough to touch the sides and rest, so we had to add a second beam here. But of course, I had measured out these cross beams before I did that, so I'd measured them out for 49 inches. Then I needed to add a beam on each side for each level. So then I had to make all these cross beams 46 inches, right? And then now I don't have the screw that's deep enough to go all through, so we go back to the store and get more screws. But the good news is we're still gonna be able to complete the project. We didn't have to restart or anything. The bad news is exactly what we thought. Things get thrown at us, curveballs. Nothing was gonna turn out the way we planned, but that's okay. We are adapting and progressing. All 3 stands are standing and vertical, and next I'm going to install the cross beams that are gonna meet everywhere the tanks meet, just to give it extra support. Some clouds rolling in, hopefully trying to beat them. It was supposed to rain all day, but we've been lucking out and been able to get a lot done. Started about 9:30, was thinking it was gonna rain and only gonna get an hour or 2 of work, but it is now 6:30, 7 o'clock, and hopefully we'll get what I wanna get finished before these clouds let loose. Almost done with the sawing and nailing and screwing. We have to make this stand right here look like this one. So we got a few more cuts to make that happen and then screw those in place. Today's the final day of cutting. We should be able to get this stand right here all braced up. These first 2 stands are already braced up. So once I'm done cutting and bracing the final third stand, we're just going to fill in some of the cracks and crevices with some stainable wood filler, let that dry for a few hours, then we're going to stain these puppies up. We've officially finished cutting all the wood and assembling all the stands. Now we can move on to the wood filler. It's going to fill in some of these little crevices and gaps with some wood filler, let it sit for a few hours, and then come back later and stain everything. Then once everything's stained, let it sit for a day. We're not that far off from water. Once you're at this point, you have plenty of options on how to quote unquote finish them. I don't recommend using pressure treated wood, as I've heard long term that the chemical used in the pressure treatment, if it gets wet and then like drips down and leaks into a tank, it could not be good. In this case, I'm going to go with a stain. You could also paint them. People also do like a polyurethane, so you have plenty of options. If I were to build these stands again, I probably wouldn't do the same process in terms of filling in these nail holes. As you'll see, I used a lot more wood filler than I probably needed. The purpose is to kind of hide the screw holes That way when you stain or paint it, you can't even tell they're there. I had the opposite effect. At the end of the day, it's not gonna positively or negatively affect the structural integrity, so it's up to you. But if I was gonna do this again, I wouldn't even fill in the screw holes. This is what we're looking like right now. All 3 stands have been filled in as far as the screws are concerned. And then also some of the gaps, just kind of filled it in. Gonna let this sit for a while. Gonna make one more trip to the store, pick up a few odds and ends, and then get back here and stain these bad boys. Today should be the last day. We're gonna hit it with some sanding, then we're gonna stain up these stands. We should be good to go. The last trip to the store was to buy this. The good news is throughout this whole ordeal, debacle, those all sound negative, but throughout this whole adventure, I've been picking up new tools along the way. I'm not a guy who owns any tools, not a handy guy at all. This is above and beyond the most complicated expert level project I've ever done, even though a lot of you probably laughing at that, saying this is like, you know, level 201. Regardless, it's been good to pick up some new tools. I'm gonna have a little fun rolling around while we sand and then stain these while we stand, what are we gonna do? While we sand and then stain these stands. That's it. Even though the sanding was one of the more enjoyable and easier tasks in this whole project, it wouldn't be necessary, especially to the extent that I did it, if I didn't use the wood filler. I would just be kind of sanding off some of the edges of the 2x4s. So using the wood filler in this instance kind of created a lot of additional work. It's time for the fish room to smell like rich mahogany. One of many, many firsts on this project. This is my first time ever staining anything. I take that back. I might have stained something in like wood shop in 6th grade, but this is the first time actually staining something, and I went a little heavy on the stain. I recommend that you do it very, very light and then kind of wipe it down with a towel. As you can see here, I kind of almost painted it on pretty heavy. In my opinion, it still looks leaps and bounds better than the old school cinder block and 2x4 method. However, if you really take your time and focus on just a little bit of stain and using a towel to kind of wipe it in, you could probably make it even look better. Finish with the first coat on the first stand. Not sure we're gonna do a full-blown second coat. We're gonna see how it turns out. I need to, once this dries, I'm going to do the very bottoms and get the bottoms nice and sealed, and then figure out, just, you know, maybe hit up second coat in some spots. Not sure if I'll do a full second coat yet, but now we're gonna start on doing stand number 2 and stand number 3. We're cruising, we're jamming, we're cruising. We got 2 stands down. I'm gonna hit this one back with some final touches again. Once we finish the 3rd one, then we'll go back and just touch everything up, hit the very bottoms of the stands. But it's been going pretty good. Moving on to the last one, which is, I think, the smallest one, but I'm not sure because it's got the doubles and whatever. Who cares? We're rolling. Let's go. Got the big boy gallon can because I'm not sure if you can see this, but she's almost empty. But we are finally done with the first, and I'm guessing it's gonna be the last full coat. I don't think we're gonna need 2 full-blown coats. This is the first stain we painted. As you can see, it's starting to get dry a little bit. I really like the color. The one that we just was freshly painted, still a little wet. As you can see, it's darker. I wouldn't mind if it was that color, but I'm actually kind of happy it's a little lighter. I didn't want it to be too dark. And this is a red mahogany, so we got a little bit of a red chocolate going on. Not too dark, but I'm liking it. I think it looks good. Half the advice I've gotten has been about protecting the feet, protect the bottom, which makes sense. In the meantime, while they dry, my goal is gonna be to take these tanks and these tanks, clean them, and then start breaking down this rack system and then temporarily assemble them like here or something. But first, take a break for lunch. I am currently draining these tanks halfway and then staging them over here. I'm gonna put them on the new stand and then refill them. This is such a gamble. These tanks are being sloshed around. This is a one-man show. I drained that tank a little too low. This tank is getting close. We're pushing forward. We're gonna get this done, and it's gonna look awesome, and it's gonna be awesome. But we're got a lot of work ahead of us. We're gonna keep going. As the new racks are sitting, drying in the driveway,
I continued to break down the old rack system and reassemble it just a couple feet away because I needed to stage these tanks because a lot of these tanks are gonna go right back onto the new rack system.
Strongman exercises, I have to lift these tanks that they're only half full, but they probably weigh over 100 pounds. Lift them up to here and then over to the new rack. It's 1:26 in the morning and all the tanks are set back up on the stands. Didn't go perfect by a mile, but didn't lose any fish. Got shipments of fish as we were setting all this up and cracked a few tanks. That's okay. Not out of the woods yet. Still a lot to go, but all the fish are set back up on sponge filters. Everybody's okay. Got a nice 80% water change, and time to call it a night.
I hope you now feel more confident in being able to tackle this type of project yourself. At the end of the day, the Dado cut is a much stronger hold. More DIY videos for Fish Cave 2.0 are coming. Check out the build right here. I appreciate you guys watching, especially to the end. And always remember, even when you're bleeding, sweating, and tearing, stay positive and stay passionate.